You're like a child that's wandered in the movie theater halfway through and you're wondering what's going on. This is Donny Cast for the 7th of July, 2022. I am your host, Walter, on the good lie and the greater good. So let's get into it. Let's see. So the big news of the day, obviously, we're going to skip for a second. It's the the death of actor James Caan, probably best known, I'd say, for The Godfather, where he played Sonny Corleone. And here's a spoiler for you: I was never a big fan of any of the Godfathers. I didn't really think they were all that was cracked up to be. So go ahead and turn this off. My big thing with James Caan was he was in a 2000 movie by the name of Way of the Gun. It was written by Christopher McQuarrie. He's famous now for doing the Mission Impossible movies, but I knew him before that. He's the writer of The Usual Suspects, Kaiser Sose and whatnot. So James Caan starred in this movie as a washed up old bagman. And I, like I said, it's one of my favorite movies of all time. And James Caan died today at 82. And I just typed this in James Caan masculinity. And these are the articles that came up on his death because it was talking about him being a tough guy actor. Some of the headlines announcing his death call him a macho actor. And while Caan always enacted a masculinity that was elemental in a way that was beyond conventional, to call him macho suggests a bullishness and lack of empathy that is in fact the antithesis of actors' gifts. That was from a Decider that just popped up, and we have tough guy actor, movie craftsman, on-string tough guy, whatnot, and there is a truth to that. That's part of the big reason why I want to talk about James Caan. Here's another article that came out in today on his death. James Caan once lived at the Playboy Mansion. Joked it was to get over his divorce. He was good friends with Hugh Hefner back in the day. Here's a picture of the two of them. Um, so my thoughts on the death of James Caan, and the decline of Western civilization is he was a masculine archetype back when he was probably at his most famous in the 70s and the 80s. And uh now I'd ask, for better or for worse, like, who are our masculine archetypes? Like, who are the archetypes out there in the world? Even if it was a negative example, an example of what not to be, this archetype death will only lead to the reemergence of that negative idea of masculinity because of the vacuum that will inevitably cause. Like, people won't know, or excuse me, I shouldn't even say people, young men won't know how not to act. And that means that they will act that way because there's no way, nobody to point at that and say, don't be that guy, right? Even if that was your opinion of James Caan as that macho masculine actor, people could just wag their finger at a guy like James Caan and say, don't be him. And you know who are we telling young men to act like, and who are we telling them not to act like? That's the question, because there was a on-screen bravado with James Caan in the roles that he took that have an effect on those people that watch it, because he had a charisma to him. That's why he was a successful actor. And at the end of the day, losing this type of uh, pattern to emulate with how your identity is very difficult, because we don't have anybody currently to say act like that guy. You can't point at Joe Biden and say act like Joe Biden. You can't really point at Donald Trump and say act like Donald Trump. You might wag at these guys and say don't act like these guys, but that's the best that we have. That's not a very good bar. We don't have the John Wayne, James Caan, Jimmy Caan types that at the very least permeated Hollywood, and therefore our young men had a role model, if they didn't have role models in their actual lives, of what is that. In this case, you could see the picture, that open shirt, hairy chest type of masculinity that is important to a certain extent, either as a flourish to identity or as a baseline to it. Because at the end of the day, a main thing of being masculine is making mistakes. And that's part of the reason why I like where he says James Caan once lived at the Playboy Mansion. I didn't read this article, but just the headline, he lived at the Playboy Mansion and he joked it was getting over his divorce. making mistakes, getting back up on the horse. That is an essential part of masculinity and identity. Um, and I bring this up, today on the death of James Caan to point out that, uh, and I don't have a lot to say about this, but like a Breitbart article that came out today saying that the Army training says soldiers must shower with transgender persons of the opposite sex. Now, in particular to this, they are talking about female to male soldiers. So you would have a biological female who still has her boobies and vagina, showering with males, and we all know this is not what's going to occur, because it actually talks later on in this article. It's not the greatest article in the world. It's that you're going to have young men who lack the identity of masculinity that join the army, and for whatever reason that they decide to, are going to get the opportunity to shower with young ladies, because they are going to quote unquote identify as women, and therefore by our army policy be able to shower with the young ladies. Yes, it's important that you have good role models, and have institutions that are primarily masculine, like the military, to reinforce some of those good archetypes for what positive masculinity is. And obviously we don't have them anymore, and the death of a man who in one way, shape, or form set that example just goes to show that we are lacking the fundamental bedrock of what our culture was and should continue to be. So anyway, just like I said, it's just going to blur the lines of identity a little bit more, and wonder why our armed forces are nowhere near the recruitment levels that they need in order to protect our country from all enemies, foreign and domestic. Segue. So, uh, the big story, I guess, of today is going to be the Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister of the UK, facing calls to quit as Prime Minister as soon as possible. So he stepped down today as the head of the Conservative Party, the Tories over there in the UK. He intends to carry on until the next Prime Minister is elected in autumn. The new head of the party, it's a different politics than over in USA land. Um, Less than 3 years ago, Mr. Johnson won a historic landslide victory in a general election, but he has been dogged by controversy in recent months, including a fine for breaking his own lockdown laws. Uh, the bottom line is, Boris Johnson has been a disappointment. The Tories have been a disappointment. They won a massive landslide. We think of it, what is intended to be occurring going into the 2022 midterms. They won that over in the UK, and then they did nothing, and they were the opposite of what you would think going up against a party of socialists would do. The Conservatives basically said, "Oh, we're just socialist lights, and we're going to lock down the country and run the economy into the ground, and not actually stand up to the EU, and not stand up to work policies, and just be spineless, incompetent hacks," which is the problem with the Republicans in the United States. So it says, the revolt this week was triggered by revelations about the prime minister's handling of sexual misconduct allegations against former deputy chief whip Chris Pincher. I don't know anything about that. This was the straw that broke the camel's back. He sucked for a while. They've been losing faith in him. They did a vote of no confidence that he barely eked his way to stay into power within his own party. This has just been a long time coming, and it was going to be the next scandal. And scandals happen to always be happening in politics, because everybody's got reporters on speed dial to be able to climb the ladder. Chaos is a ladder. Back when Game of Thrones was actually good. So continuing on with UK politics, like we have the sterling, the British pound. It gained a little bit, finding out that the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson steps down. You could see it's been steadily decreasing, but it had, like, I think it was like a 0.6% bump today. The main thing out of this article, when it talks about like the economies generally don't like what's the word, they don't like uncertainty. Obviously, having a prime minister that no one has any faith in is uncertain. So I picked out some choice clips from this article about the sterling and kind of the direction that's going. It says Roger Jones, head of UK equities at London and Capital, told CNBC there was some relief in currency markets because this is not going to be a long drawn out with the prime minister refusing to go and ultimately causing a policy stalemate. Again, uncertainty. It's possible that fiscal policy may be a bit looser and monetary policy may be a bit tighter. Again, everybody's just concerned about inflation, the rampant or the specter of a non-declared world recession that we all know we're already in right now. Judging by earlier lineup of potential successors to Johnson, the balance of potential outcomes would tilt towards less strained relations with the EU. We'll talk about that in a second. Even the ardent Brexiteer candidates are less of the populist variety than Johnson. He was kind of touted as the British Trump. He was not. This suggests that while it is unclear whether UK EU relations could improve a bit or a lot, the overall situation stands to be much more calmer, i.e., uncertainty, less uncertainty, he said in a note. So the biggest thing is, like, part of the reason why the Tories were able to win in UK elections is because of the mismanagement by both the Tories and the Labour Party when it comes to their Brexit with the EU. And that was one of the things that Johnson did come in and sort of set a hard line against the EU when it comes to leaving. From a oligarch standpoint in the UK, Brexit was never popular. The politicians, the powers that be, those people with power never really wanted to leave the EU. So, and that includes even the Tories, the Conservative Party over there. So it's more likely that whoever they vote to bring in will have a much more cordial relationship with the EU. There's a problem with that being that the next prime minister of the UK probably will not have the country's best interest at heart. Well, I shouldn't even say the country, the kingdom's best interest at heart. Let's see. Over time, less fraught and uncertain UK EU relations may prove to be the catalyst for stronger business investment and sustained appreciation in sterling towards fair value against the dollar and the euro. Like I said, markets dislike uncertainty. And if anything, they don't dislike what's happening. If the sterling went up a little bit, the markets generally like the direction of getting Boris Johnson out, for whatever that means. The people that own lots of the pound, the Tories behind Johnson's leadership have generally fumbled the advantage over the lefties, the Tories, or excuse me, the Labour moron communists. The problem is Johnson's likely successors would appear to be more EU friendly, which I pointed out, and that will bring less uncertainty to all of Europe. But again, like I already pointed out, just reading my notes over again, that the EU's interest is not going to be a priority. This is probably bad for the UK in general, because they don't have that candidate that will come in and draw a line and say, like, the kingdom, I will, God save the queen. They're just not going to have that. But that's also culturally probably not what the UK would do. They're never going to have their version of Trump to save them. A little bit more reserved over there. So moving on to protecting borders, House Republicans backed Texas County's invasion declaration in response to border crisis. I know I'm supposed to speak slower. So it has officials from several Texas counties on Tuesday declared migrant crisis and invasion. The declarations are likely to put further pressure on Texas Governor Greg Abbott to make a statewide declaration, which some conservatives believe would give the state the authority to return the migrants across the border. So this happened yesterday. We'll get into today's story. I don't really have a lot to say about Governor Abbott. I don't have a lot of thoughts about him. He does generally seem to be wishy-washy. Not really a populist, but he does tend to go in the direction of the populist wins. The downside of him is he's kind of lackluster when it comes to having his own internal ideology. The star that guides him. He has been called a rhino or a rhino light, Republican name only, which is kind of odd coming out of Texas. That would be the one downside to Abbott, is he's not generally regarded as some of your more popular governors like a DeSantis. So moving forward, the push for the invasion declarations has been promoted since last year by former Office of Management and Budget Director Russ Voigt. I don't know who that is, and former acting deputy DHS Secretary Ken something Italian, both now at the Center of Renewing America, which I have no idea about. So this has been pushed around, and it's not a bad idea. They have pointed to the language in Article 1 of the Constitution, which allows for the states to engage in war when it has been actually invaded or in such imminent danger as will not admit or delay without the approval of Congress. They also note Article 4 says the U.S. shall protect each state against invasion. I actually have the articles up where they're referencing Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, which says to provide for calling forth the militia to execute the laws of the Union, suppress the insurrections, and repel invasions. And then Article 4, Section 4 of the United States shall guarantee every state in the Union a republican form of government and shall protect each of them against invasion on the application of the legislature or the executive when the legislature cannot be convened against domestic violence. The problem here, this goes back to the Dobbs case, the repeal of Roe versus Wade. It's going to be the historical definition of invasion, because this is likely going to end up going through the court system, and not our current idea of what invasion would mean. So again, invasion meaning what was in common parlance when this was written, what the historical documentation says about invasion. You could make a very subjective argument that there is an invasion going on, but the larger problem about this is going to go the role of the states and the federal government, and the kind of the contract, the compact that the Constitution provides. Continuing on in the article, the push paid off in February when Arizona Attorney General Mark something or other issued a legal opinion declaring the crisis of invasion, and argued that the definition of invasion contained under the U.S. Constitution is not limited to hostile foreign states and can include hostile non-state actors. Yes, and if he goes down the road of declaring NGOs, he's going to definitely have the ability to he's going to have a leg to stand on. This is probably going to be a long-term issue in the United States, and how to deal with non-governmental organizations that are being funded by foreign governments, hostile or non-hostile, mostly hostile, and hostile individuals, both domestic and internationally, that may have certain anti-nationalist goals pushing forward. So the big issue, and these are my notes, that general renegotiation of the contract, i.e. the Constitution, or more accurately, the reaffirming of the original contract, the Constitution, in a similar capacity to how NATO countries aren't pulling their weight when it comes to the NATO contract. So in this case, if the government, the federal government's not going to do their job, why are the states engaged in this, this agreement? Or does this allow for the states to step up and fill the gap when the federal government isn't doing their job? Or is the federal government doing what is enumerated to themselves underneath the Constitution, which means the states don't have the 10th Amendment right to do anything? So this is kind of the line that's being drawn. At the end of the day, what's going to end up being the issue, and I've talked about this before in the past, is a decentralization that's going to go on. It's going to push power back to the states where they should belong. If the federal government ain't going to do its job, why are you paying it taxes? And that's going to be a big issue with Texas going for a country or a state like Texas that is going to have a problem of the southern border. If they're relying on the federal government to do dick for them, they were always stupid in the first place. And if they are paying money to the federal government to do something like this, why are they doing it? And then we're going to get into, certain problems with paying income tax to the federal government when you are a citizen of Texas. This will come up down the line when they're obviously not treating you with any care in the state that you live in versus, say, another state that may not have certain of these problems. So, further going on, the Justice Department investigating Texas Operation Lone Star border security mission, which is where Governor Abbott basically activated the Texas National Guard and the state cops down there in Texas to patrol the border. So in this one, there's a quote where it says there were 239,416 migrant encounters at the southern border in May, a new record surpassing the previous all-time high of 235,478 encounters that was set in April the previous month. This is the lawfare portion of our current Cold War, that's civil Cold War that's going on in the country. They're just going to lob lawsuits at each other to try and get their way. The department is seeking this information after receiving information indicating that DPS may be discriminating on the basis of race and or national origin in its activities related to Operation Lone Star by targeting certain individuals for arrests for misdemeanor trespass, violations, and traffic stops based on their perceived or actual race or national origin, said Christine Stoneman, the chief of the Federal Coordination and Compliance Section, wrote in the May letter to the top DPS officials. And I'm just going to say bullshit, and this is all bullshit. I couldn't find the old quotes where I think it was from the Obama administration where they misunderstood that not all immigrants aren't brown, because the internet is not very hospitable to certain viewpoints at this point. So at the end of the day, it's really bullshit, because if you're in Texas, the ones that you want are not the brown skinned guys coming up from Central and South America. You want the Africans, migrants that are coming up from, like, say, coming into Mexico or South America and coming up from, like, Somalia. You want to be finding those at the southern border, because those are going to have better political optics, or even the Middle Eastern, shall we say, on terrorist watch lists that are coming up through the Texas border. Those are the ones that are going to have more value. So at the end of the day, the only thing that they would potentially be able to rest their hat on, the DOJ suing or investigating Texas, would be if they were not targeting whites at all. But again, if there are individuals of lighter skin that are both from South America, because those exist, or if you have immigrants coming in from Eastern Europe that are coming up through Mexico, those have value to show that the Biden administration just is doing nothing to stop the flow of migrants across the southern border. So at the end of the day, like, if you're in Texas and you're doing this Operation Lone Star, you want anybody, because all of it is good optics at this point. 200,000 people pouring across the border a month that are having law enforcement contacts. So this came out today. Governor Abbott, moving forward, saying that the Texas governor authorizes state to return migrants to the border. So this is going to be another of your lawfares that are going to go on. Texas Governor Greg Abbott on Thursday authorized state forces to apprehend migrants and return them to the U.S.-Mexico border, pushing the boundaries of their enforcement powers and the Republicans' escalating efforts to curb the rising number of crossings. And this is just going to be a 10th Amendment issue versus what is the domain of the federal government. And it's going to get kind of nasty. Right now, with the Supreme Court, the setup the way they are, I imagine that they are going to slap the federal government probably for their dereliction, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the courts can do anything about it, because the courts are kind of the weakest branch, the executive branch being the strongest branch, because they have all the guns, and the legislative branch having all the money. So you'd have to have a legislative branch that wants to choke the executive branch financially, and the executive branch has the ability to go down there and secure the border. So even if the Supreme Court basically says bad Biden administration, doesn't mean the Biden administration has to do anything about it. Let's see. The impact of the order Did I screw this up? I probably screwed this up. The impact of the order was unclear, including how widely it would be used and under what circumstances, but the authority described by Abbott would amount to a significant and untested expansion of the normal powers of the National Guard and the state police, uh, who until now have turned migrants over to Border Patrol agents, and in some cases made arrests on state trespassing charges. Yeah, again, like the National Guard is the National Guard militia is basically like the military for the states, and it gets into some really tricky uh, areas when it comes to do the states have the ability to enforce their borders, which again, yes they do, but to the extent that they supersede the federal government, which they do not. And so it's going to get really dicey here. That's what they're talking about. Uh, I already said it's going to go back to the states. It's going to hinge on the arguments that are put forward. There are some pretty compelling arguments for the states saying that the federal government's not doing their job. However, it's still the federal government's job to do. I already pointed that out. Let's see. Ultimately, this is going to backfire on the Biden administration because the less the states depend on the central government, the less power the central government has. So it's just an emperor has no clothes, and it's going to force the states one way or another to deal with their own problems without having, uh, you know, somebody there that they can count on as a safety net. And that's not a bad thing because that creates innovation. That means there's going to be workarounds that they're going to figure out how to deal with this problem because everybody has been relying on everybody else to wipe their butt. And this is going to force Texas to wipe their own butt. And something that they should have already been doing, which is setting up a way to deal with a problem that is unique to Texas, that is not, say, unique to Wyoming. And then to move forward, we have good old Miss Tulsi Gabbard running her mouth on Fox News. Not a lot to do with Tulsi Gabbard, more along to do with a poll that came out that she was talking about. And I don't like polls. Polls are just numbers, but in this case, they're pretty bad. She was talking about it's the lowest rating of all three branches, which is the legislative branch and the executive branch, and the Supreme Court would have 20%. A quarter of the country has faith in the establishment because, as Tulsi Gabbard points out, it's there. These institutions are being weaponized by the DC establishment, and again, it's just showing more and more the emperor has no clothes. They're not doing their job, and at 25% of people that have trust in these institutions, you've done fucked up. All that's going to again cause is decentralization. No one's going to want to hitch their wagon to something that they see as a sinking ship or a dumpster fire, corrupt dumpster fire. And again, the downside of that is demoralization. No one's going to want to feel proud that they're American when the system is so bungled and broken at this point. All right, so speaking of, if you don't look out for your own interests, no one else will do it. So you have Biden sending U.S. oil reserves to Europe. So I just type that in, see what it comes up with. It gets a little dicey here because I may have it pulled up. I do later on. So Biden and the Biden administration in their misguided attempts to bring gas prices in line have been opening up the strategic reserves. And this is Tim Cast. He's a weirdo on the internet. I like the byline which says, if the Biden administration indefinitely continues releasing oil from the strategic reserves at the current rate, the entire supply could be gone by early November 2023. We'll get into that a little bit in a second. I did find it interesting when I was kind of researching it that the strategic petroleum reserves do kind of not belong to the U.S. entirely because we're signed into some compact with a whole bunch of other countries. But I was seeing signs today that they are sending some of the oil to, say, like China, and I don't think they're part of this consortium of countries to stockpile this oil in the United States that came about after the filing the 1973 energy crisis. That they turn around, they made these strategic reserves, so there's always oil. So in the 70s, there was such severe gas supply issues that you couldn't get gas on particular days of the week. You had to get them on the days of the week that you were assigned. There was like large gas lines going out, high inflation. I mean, we're getting a repeat of the 1970s going on right now. So, brought this up before that like Trump was not Reagan. Trump was more like Gerald Ford, or more accurately, Richard Nixon, in a lot of ways. So Biden is a current form of the Carter administration. And as we move forward, let's see, pulling up this Zero Fund article, always like the Zero Funds article. Millions of barrels from U.S. Emergency oil reserves sent abroad, including to China. We already talked about that. With the growing number of people realizing the Biden administration has drained more oil from the U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which is meant to be used during real emergencies, not fake made up ones, such as Democrat facing catastrophic failure at midterm elections. I mean, can't be any more accurate than what was just being written. Biden opening up the strategic reserves are not going to overwhelmingly affect gas prices. That's not the problem. It is not Putin either. There are other economic and policy decisions that are causing the strategic petroleum reserves to go up. But this is what happens. I believe I wrote this down. The reality of it is the administration probably doesn't know how things work, because they're fucking retarded. While at the same time, they don't care to find out how. They think that they understand it, and they're going through the motions of doing it. I would still say that they don't have the nation's interest at heart. So even if they're retarded, it doesn't mean that they give a shit. They don't like the country. But there is a difference between overt acts and implicit negligence. In this case, this is implicit negligence. Once we get to that overt act of treason, that's a different thing. But these are just morons. And I wrote down in my notes, like, think of it like this. It's like a child that keeps coming back to a tree for fruit. The child doesn't go, how much fruit does the tree have for me to take? They don't know. What will happen if I eat all the fruit? They don't think about that. How do we take care of the tree in the future? They don't care. They're just a child. They just keep taking the fruit. That's kind of the way the current administration views things. They don't care. They just keep taking the fruit because in their mind, there's always going to be fruit from the tree because the country has done things in the past that deserve it to be treated a particular way. And they think that there will always be blood from the stone to which to get the taxes to fund whatever stupidity that they have in mind. So it's still not quite to the levels of malice, but it is definitely getting that direction. I didn't even remember I have this story up. So we have and Ontario considering expanding COVID-19 booster shots to all adults amid seventh wave. At this point, we're the COVID-19 pandemic is now endemic, meaning it will always be here. There will be a seventh wave. There will be an eighth wave. There will be a ninth wave. There will be a 426th wave. The waves will always happen. The virus will continue to mutate. It is the common cold at this point. And I say to end this vaccine that they are pushing in Canada on the seventh wave is a vaccine that when Pfizer was confronted by the Indian government, and the Indian government said, we have 1.38 billion people, but before you can start handing out this vaccine in our country, we want to see the data. Pfizer packed their bags and said, nah, we don't need to be giving out vaccines to 1.38 billion people. Seventh wave in Canada, booster shots to all adults. Yes, continue to do the same thing over and over again and expect a different outcome. That your vaccine will stop the eighth wave. So this article, white children are especially likely to be overdiagnosed and treated for ADHD, according to a new study. So I don't know what this site called The Conversation is. I did look them up. They have a link to a lot of colleges and other sources. All I can say about their mission statement, if I can hunt it down real quick, it says The Conversation is a nonprofit independent news organization dedicated to unlocking the knowledge of experts for the public good. We publish trustworthy and informative articles written by academic experts for the general public and edited by our team of journalists. Um, they seem all right. I've never read an article from them before, at least that I was hyper aware of. So, give me a second. So, in this article, it says among elementary school children who had shown above average academic achievement, 20%, 27% of white children versus 19% of non-white children were later diagnosed with ADHD. Uh, about 20% of the children versus 14% of the non-white children were using ADHD medication, hyperactivity deficit disorder, acute something. Uh, I'm having a little bit of stage fright when it comes to taping. Among children who had previously been well behaved in classrooms, 13% of white children versus 8% of non-white children were later diagnosed with ADHD. Families, socioeconomic uh, status, or children's age did not explain these disparities. So, as I just show myself to be how uncomfortable it is still for me to be doing stuff on the internet live. Um, so it's attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, which I know it's just whatever. Uh, just making sure that we're all on the same page if you didn't know what it meant. Let's see. Among US children and adolescents, ADHD prevalence has increased significantly from 6% to 10% over the past 20 years. Overdiagnosis may be contributing to this trend. Increases in ADHD prevalence in children are occurring among those displaying mild impairments. The bigger issue is that ADHD is rather a modern problem. This is me talking, and shows our society needs to label and medicate. And again, this comes from my opinion based off my mother saying no to me being medicated when I was a little kid. So again, the bigger thing is with ADHD, you could see the numbers are just going up from something that was not a modern problem before, where they didn't have the ability to medicate kids with amphetamines. So at this point, it is just going up. You give a if something is a hammer, they will always be looking for nails. If someone is you know looking to diagnose children with ADHD, then all children are going to look a lot like they are a nail at that point, and you're just increasing your ability to give out more and more medication for a problem that may have non uh, labeling and medication type of solutions to them, i.e., some kids may not do well in the basic setup for public education, and you're giving them medication and saying, "Sit in a classroom, don't be a kid." Going back to James Caan, don't explore your identity. You will act a particular way because the state is your parent. Your parent is just your birthing person. It's a larger systemic problem that you can see with the desire for the state just to give people medication and say, go sit in your classroom, shut the fuck up. Um, and as we move forward, why I bring that up is because you have the National Education Association Teachers Union proposes resolution to change mother to birthing parent. I wasn't fucking with you. It is unclear. It literally says this in the article. It is unclear whether the resolution passed. It was voted on. Um, and to give you an idea of the National Education Association Teachers Union, this is a priority for what they're looking at. Not better teachers, not better education, not a way to keep the number of children being diagnosed with ADHD down. They just want to make sure that they don't call you know mothers, they want to call them birthing parent, because your birthing person or entity is now the state, and they will raise you accordingly and indoctrinate you in your classrooms. So as we finish today, let's see, we have this tweet. I had to go look it up. So I guess this came out in 2008, but it was posted up on the UN's website yesterday. It was the benefits of world hunger. It was taken down in an archive, but this is a screenshot where someone has put in there, hunger has great positive value to many people. Indeed, it is fundamental to the working of the world's economy. Hungry people are the most productive people, especially where there is a need for manual labor. I will just go out and say that, like, objectively, there's nothing wrong with this statement. Even though it may hurt your feelings, it is not particularly good optics to be putting up on the UN website. But as we see with the Globo Homo that is going on, as it goes to the wrong page, let's see if I can get it to go to the correct page by clicking here. So this came up. This is also a Twitter open source journalism going on, a Ruger's paper. 2 days ago, supporters outlined principle of Ukraine's recovery. So they basically got together and carved up Ukraine as a conglomerate, saying who is going to help with what. You get all the way down to the bottom, and you get some pretty disgusting stuff that they talk about. So it says in the article, signatories welcome commitments to provide political, financial, and technological support, and launched the Lugano Principles to guide the reconstruction effort, which Kiev says could cost up to $750 billion. A lot to unpack in this, which is basically like Russia's won, because the war is not over at this point. They're under the impression something's occurring in order for you to have a reconstruction effort in the first place. So they know something that's not being pushed in the mainstream press. And again, Kiev, the capital of Ukraine, is saying that they need $750 to basically reconstruct their country. The European Union, who Ukraine has asked to join, and they've been said, yeah, okay, you can show up, still needs to make progress in areas like rule of law, reining in oligarchs. Funny that the European Union would fucking talk about that. Fighting corruption. Again, funny that the European Union would talk about that. And ensuring fundamental rights. If you were not aware, Ukraine is one of the most corrupt countries in the world, mildly more corrupt than Russia. And now the European Union is saying, well, if you want to join us, you have to actually enforce your laws, not have an oligarch ruling party for your democratic elections, not be corrupt. Mind you, the U.S. in and of themselves, I think, has already spent $54 billion to help Ukraine during the Russian invasion and ensuring fundamental rights. So you're doing this all before the country makes the strides that they need to, because, and then it says they also called for a multi-stakeholder agreement, gender equality, inclusion, and sustainability. That's ESG right there, all the way down to the stakeholder agreement. So environmental social governance score for a country at this point. And essentially the EU, the global homo, is going to rebuild Ukraine in their image. They've got their knives out post World War II Berlin, and they are dividing the country up, as you can see in the picture, into their own little swaths where they will reimagine Ukraine in their own image, because no one should have their own agency while other people can tell you how to live, because they know better, because they know how this shit works. So anyway, James Caan, dead at 82. Yeah,